Perspective on this topic. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Forefathers Monument. How many of you have actually seen the Forefathers Monument, sometimes called the Liberty Matrix, in Plymouth, Massachusetts? Okay? I think there are 4 of us, and it is something that in the documentary called Monumental, it is America's best kept secret. And so we're going to talk about that this evening. So the reason. Matt Lynch ran for Congress in the primary. And in doing so, he had on his literature, Faith, Family, and Freedom, in that order. And there were some folks who thought that the fact that he led with faith was a concern to them. And that because he was outspoken about his Christianity, that there was a fear that he was going to make people do things that they didn't want to do because he was a Christian. Now, I think that's a bit outlandish, but that was the perspective, that he was going to force religion on them. Anybody ever feel like you're having atheistic values forced on you? Or maybe atheistic values isn't, maybe that's an oxymoron. Atheistic lack of values. He was portrayed as extremist right-wing, except by Dave Joyce, who portrayed him as a moderate, and Dave Joyce portrayed himself as the right-wing. And that Matt was out of the mainstream. So let's examine this. Here are some examples of recent and or current godless societies. So these would be examples where religion has been removed from politics. In those instances, let's take a look at who is in control. Let's look, is there freedom and liberty? Is there religious freedom? Is there freedom of speech? So, in these godless societies where religion has been removed from politics. And then finally, is there persecution? Anybody familiar with this one? God, one of the first things that they did, that Hitler did when he came into power, was to ensure that religion was removed from government. They indoctrinated the kids. And those that didn't go along usually suffered some kind of severe consequences. And the Holocaust was one of the major consequences that came out of this godless society. So what occurred in Nazi Germany? One of the things that Hitler said was that the churches must be forbidden from interfering with temporal matters. Church can have its role as long as it stays out of the way. School prayers were banned, and carols and nativity plays were banned from schools. Anybody ever hear of anything like that happening? Yes. Just saying, that's what happened in Nazi Germany. The churches that were there, that kind of, quote, the liberal mainstream churches, liked Hitler's use of the words freedom and tolerance. Now, they had a whole different meaning in Nazi Germany. You were free to do whatever you want, as long as it lined up with what the government or the state said. And tolerance was, if you're on the right side, I guess it was okay, but they were extremely intolerant if you were not. Much like it might be here today, that with certain terminology, words that are not permitted, they're politically incorrect. And God ultimately had to be removed to make way for the National Socialistic policies, because those policies could not coexist with God and His laws and His commandments. They just couldn't coexist. There wasn't room for both at the same time. French Revolution occurred shortly after the American Revolution. The big difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution was that the French Revolution was godless. How did that work out for people? They had the reign of terror from September of 1793 to July of 1794, less than 1 year. Almost 17,000 people were executed by the guillotine. Another 25,000 suffered summary executions, basically firing squad and that sort of thing. I don't recall hearing about anything like that out of our revolution. USSR. Correctional labor camps. If you didn't think right, you were sent to a labor camp where you were taught how to think right if you made it out of there. And I actually have relatives who lived in the country of Latvia, which is one of the Baltic states on the Baltic Sea, right next to Russia, and where they were deported to Siberia prior to World War, or right after World War I think it was, in that time period. I think they were promised some land, but what they didn't realize was it was not very good. It was kind of cold. They had the Great Purge in the late 30s. Stalin. Depending upon what sources you look at, the number of people that were killed ranged from 3 to 60 million. I think the 3 million is probably on the low end, and that's probably some people who were more sympathetic toward communism. 60 million might be an outlandish figure, but it may be closer to what's correct with all the things that went on there. But tolerance was not one of their strong suits, or at least tolerance for dissent. Then there's Communist China with the genocide that occurs there, atheistic culture. Anybody remember the Tiananmen Square massacre?
It made the victim's family pay for the bullets too.
Yeah.
Okay. Started out as a peaceful protest. Anywhere from 250 to 7,000 died in that massacre. So these are some examples of taking it to the ultimate. These are the ultimate godless societies. Utopia would not be the way I would describe it. But when you take it to its ultimate extreme, that's what happens with societies when God is removed. When there is no restraint from the Holy Spirit, from God Himself, then the depravity of man is allowed to have free reign, and when it does, that's what results. Okay, we want to shift gears a little bit now and take a look at the perspective from our founding fathers. Now, I don't know if very many of you were at the last meeting of the Lake County Tea Party right after the election of Obama in 2012. And I gave a